Morning kids, I've never felt a hope like this before. The Tories have spent the last 10 days screaming in panic that their reign is ending. They've been shouting to everyone who'll listen, the voters don't want us anymore! As if they ever did. And when I tell you that I'm hopeful, I want you to know where I'm coming from so we're all on the same page as to what that hope feels like. Because I don't know about you, but I remember where I was when I finally accepted that the Tories were going to win the 2019 election and that Brexit was going to happen. I was sat in my car at the train station having spent 2 years with no life, social, romantic, professional, family, doing nothing but trying to prevent Brexit and stop the Tories. It was the morning of the election, all the campaigning was done, and I knew there was nothing else I could do, and so I finally allowed myself to think about what was going to happen. And I knew deep down there was no way that Corbyn was going to beat Boris Johnson. And so Brexit was going to happen. I knew that all the excess poverty and ruined lives that we've seen Brexit inflict on us in the last 3 years was going to happen. And so once I got this text from my mum, I broke down in tears. And think about everything we've been through since. We had a pandemic under a Boris Johnson government. The same people who just spent 4 years telling us not to listen to experts, that we didn't need to follow the same rules as other countries, and that we could pursue total freedom or sovereignty without any downsides, were then given the job of telling us that we had to listen to experts, that we had to follow the same rules as other countries, and that if we pursued total freedom, our grandparents would die. Which is why we ended up with a Prime Minister who told us to shake hands with COVID patients, unlawfully sent 25,000 untested patients into care homes, and led the UK to the highest excess death rate in Europe during the first year of the pandemic. And according to the Bank of England, Brexit is costing the average household £1,000 a year and has raised food prices by 6%. And don't even get me started on what the Tories have done to human rights, from banning peaceful protests to deliberately targeting black people and travellers to trying to send refugees to Rwanda. And they did all of that on the basis that they were fulfilling the will of the people. They had their huge 80-seat majority and they were just respecting democracy, right? Even though they only got 44% of the vote. But that's all gone now, because the Tories are now openly declaring that they're scared of voters, with a bunch of Tory journalists and politicians in the last 10 days saying that a fairer voting system would keep the left in power forever. V from V for Vendetta would be proud.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
It started with the rumours that Labour might be planning to lower the voting age to 16 and change the voting system from the current winner-takes-all first-past-the-post to proportional representation. And right-wing journalist and former titan of the BBC, Andrew Neil, went on Twitter to warn that this would keep the left in power forever. That's the biggest self-own in politics that I've seen in a long time, admitting that if the UK Parliament accurately reflected the votes of the British people, the right would never have power. And not only did he admit that right-wing politics depends on a rigged system to win, he literally made it headline news. And the Tories have been scared of truly representative democracy for a while. Last year, Dominic Raab said that proportional representation was a real threat to the Conservative Party.
And we know their price too. There's no secret about it. One referendum on electoral reform, the other a referendum to break up this great United Kingdom of ours. That threat is real.
But it gets better, because the Conservative Democratic Organisation had their big launch this weekend. And you'll see why their name is ironic in a second, because here's what Tory Lord Peter Curtis had to say.
If Labour wins a big majority at the next election, they will reduce the voting age to 16, they will abolish voter ID, and they will introduce proportional representation, making it almost impossible for the Conservatives to win an outright majority in the future.
That's not just an admission that the majority of people don't want Conservative governments. It's also an admission that the Conservative Democratic Organisation decides what's democratic based on whether or not the Tories get to control everything. And that's not even the first time they've admitted this so bluntly. Here's the reason Tory MP Tobias Ellwood said they refused to let 16-year-olds vote in the 2019 election.
And whilst the age of voting should be a debate that we have in this country, to suddenly thrust upon us right now, when we know it'll probably favour one particular party, now's not the right time to do it.
Just so we're clear, once you start deciding who gets to vote based on who they're going to vote for, you are in full fascism territory, and the Tories are planting their flag there with both hands. But the top spot this week has to go to Jacob Rees-Mogg, just bluntly admitting that their new voter ID laws were an attempt to rig all UK elections by discouraging young people from voting.
Parties that try and gerrymander end up finding that their clever scheme comes back to bite them, as, dare I say, we found by insisting on voter ID for elections.
Then there was Tom Harwood, the political version of Draco Malfoy. He was a lot more subtle. He said that a proportional voting system would mean that our governments would always be a result of grubby, backroom, cross-party political deal-making rather than a coherent manifesto elected by the people. But the winning party almost never gets a majority of the votes of the people, yet they always get a majority of the seats in Parliament. So if your argument against proportional voting is that one party with a minority of the vote should be able to pass whatever laws they want without having to even consult the parties voted for by the majority, You don't want democracy. You want the other thing. And he's been scared for a while, because 2 weeks after the 2019 election, I went on Good Morning Britain knowing that the only way to save the UK was to change the voting system so that everybody's vote would count equally. And look how uncomfortable that makes him. You can see him physically wincing.
The majority, 52%, voted for parties that were committed to a second referendum, 52.7% actually. So, and that's the problem with our electoral system. Okay. If, for example, the Tories get 40% in every single constituency and the remaining 60% is split between 30% for Labour, 30% for Lib Dems, and that happens in every single constituency, the Tories get 100% of the seats. All right. We have a broken electoral system.
But back then, that was just a dream, because the Tories were still riding high on their election win. But now, the Labour Party's members have come out in favour of proportional voting, and yes, I know that Keir Starmer is an obstacle, because he supports our current voting system where one party gets to control everything, because he's just another politician living in the past.
And he does not share power.
But people already prefer proportional voting over our current system by a ratio of 2 to 1, and the Tories are now publicly shrieking in fear of it. So regardless of Keir Starmer, that change is coming. Because in almost every single election since World War II, the majority of votes have gone to parties to the left of the Tories. So when that change happens, we're going to see a completely different UK. And as Andrew Neil said, it'll be forever. Have a great week.